In the office of the deputy head of the Department for the Investigation of Particularly Grave Murders, a complex and difficult conversation was taking place. The major, with a tenacious, attentive look, asked Alina question after question. Yesterday's graduate of the police school felt out of place and often answered inappropriately. Alina Viktorovna, do you know what you will face on this assignment in the clinic? Believe me, the mission is dangerous and involves a high degree of risk, Major Positive asked. I don't care, Sergei Alexandrovich. For me, this is just work and nothing more, Alina answered. The major clasped his fingers in the lock and thought. Deep down, he really didn't want to send this girl on such a dangerous mission. The major knew that she would have very little chance of getting out of the water dry. But on the other hand, this young beauty with a provincial, slightly naive expression on her face was the best suited for this purpose. The only thing the major did not like was that Alina had a personal interest in this matter. Sergei Alexandrovich knew from experience that in such cases, excessive emotions, or zeal can only do harm. By the way, if she is so eager to fight, then let her prove her right to exist and work in my department by deed, Major Positive thought. Of course, he did not talk about it aloud and, after some hesitation, proceeded to the briefing. Well, Alina, in general, I am satisfied with your candidacy, so let's get to the point. As you probably already know from the materials provided by me, in the private clinic the cases of deaths of patients have recently increased dramatically. At first glance, everything happens, it seems, usually, yes, only 4 deaths per week. This is too much. We already tried to conduct an official investigation, but by and large, this did not lead to anything. Mutual responsibility reigns in the clinic and the medical staff, wanting to preserve the reputation of the institution, stands up for each other. From a medical point of view, they cannot be undermined. All patient deaths appear natural. But this is if you read the dry, emotionless case history of the deceased. But if you imagine a young guy who died in his prime from a heart attack, it becomes uncomfortable. Therefore, we decided to introduce our agent into the clinic. As you may have guessed, we need a person with medical experience and skills. And you, as I remember, have an unfinished medical education, right? Yes, you are right. I have 3 medical courses under my belt. I dreamed of becoming a surgeon like my father. And then, in general, they expelled me, Alina answered embarrassedly. Expelled for what? The major tried to clarify. I can't stand the sight of blood. This is my phobia, the girl answered extremely reluctantly. But you do understand that you have to work as a nurse in surgery? How do you imagine that? Suddenly, during the operation, you just collapse into a faint? Positive doubted. No. I can handle. You don't have to worry about me. I give a guarantee that I will be able to fulfill my duties and conduct an investigation in parallel, with pressure on the last word, Alina answered, who was already rather tired of this conversation. Major Positive understood that he was taking risks, but he had no other choice. Over the past month, 15 people have died in the interned clinic. And such a fact, the police leadership could no longer ignore. The most unpleasant thing was that 2 weeks ago, within the walls of this clinic, a patient died, who was actually an embedded police captain. At the same time, the athlete died of a heart attack, like any 80-year-old smoker. The major understood that most likely this was due to the fact that the embedded operative could dig up something in this strange clinic, in which patients were dying like flies. Continuing to instruct Alina before implementation, Positive also provided for an emergency communication channel. In addition to the main conversation on the phone, a system of conventional signs was developed in the form of labels on a stand with advertisements for the sale of something, standing within walking distance from the clinic. In general, the operation was developed very soundly. But whether the young employee will be able to competently conduct an investigation, of course, still remained a mystery. The next morning, having received the last instructions, Alina went to the interned private clinic. It was a 3-story building with a new renovation, made according to European standards. In the hall, Alina was greeted by the nurse on duty, who, after a short conversation, took her to the head physician Arseny Pavlovich. He was a tall man, of a lean build, with pale and in some places bluish skin. After reviewing Alina's resume, he gave her an appraising look and said, "I think you're good for us. You know, I'm even flattered that you agreed to work in our clinic. I am sure that with your experience, you will become one of our best employees. Get in the know and get to know your colleagues," said Arseny Pavlovich, grinning meaningfully. In response to this, Alina warmly thanked the head physician and went to the surgery department located on the second floor. Throughout the journey, the girl did not leave the feeling of anxiety and sticky fear, creeping droplets of cold sweat down her back. Despite the fact that the clinic had undergone a newfangled renovation, its environment looked ominous and unfriendly. The surgery department smelled sharply of iodine, bleach, and something else that looked like a mixture of dead epithelium and pus. In addition to Alina, 3 more nurses worked in this building. They had a haughty look, indicating that they consider themselves real queens in white coats. There were about 30 patients with various diseases. One had an appendix removed, the second had an ulcer, and the third were completely with domestic injuries that required emergency suturing. What is wrong with this clinic? Why are patients dying en masse in it? Alina thought, looking around warily. The fact was that one of the reasons that prompted the girl to join the investigation was that the employee who died 2 weeks ago was her fiancé. They were already preparing for the wedding when a naturally healthy guy died of a heart attack. The head of the surgical department turned out to be a plump man of about 45. His bald head, smooth as a billiard ball, was always shiny with sweat and involuntarily evoked a smile. After studying Alina's accompanying documents, he said, "You can get to work. According to the schedule, you have night duty today. That's where you'll start. I hope you are not afraid to work at night." Hearing about this, Alina shuddered, but then quickly pulled herself together. "Yes, of course, without problems." "Well, that's fine. I hope you will like it with us," answered Igor Dmitrievich, head of the department. Actually, in the depths of her soul, Alina hoped that she would not be assigned night duty on the very first day. But on the other hand, at night it will be calmer in the department and, if desired, you can explore the clinic up and down. The rest of the day flew by in the usual medical chores, applying a couple of dressings and removing sutures from a post-operative patient. Nothing special. Alina coped with this task on Europe. Finally, the doctors and nurses on the day shift went home, and dusk slowly fell over the clinic. Alina had to keep order in the department together with the head nurse Katya. But instead of instructing a new employee, she, with a sense of accomplishment, collapsed to sleep in the nursing room. Yet, well, they have orders here. And also a private clinic, Alina thought with resentment. Trying to pass the time, the girl decided to go around all the wards one by one and check the condition of the patients. Most of the patients were asleep and only one of them was awake and very restless. It was a patient from a solitary ward located at the very end of the corridor. By an evil irony of fate, there was a sign with the number 13 on the door. Glancing into the ward, Alina noted that the patient was very excited and nervous. "Don't touch me, you'll hear. I don't need any medicine. I don't need to be treated. I'm not sick at all," the patient whispered when he saw the nurse in the doorway. "How is it not sick? According to the medical history, you recently had your appendix removed," Alina remarked in surprise. After her words, the patient generally went berserk. "Oh? Yes. You are one of the newcomers, apparently. Appendicitis? Yes. Yes. I got it removed at school. And they removed my internal organs. Eating from the inside, you know. I've been here for 2 months now. Previously, I weighed 120 kilograms, and now, in me, it's hardly 70. The man whispered, frightened. What do you want to say? Who eats you from the inside? And what exactly do you mean? In time with the interlocutor, switching to a whisper, Alina asked. And the fact that they keep me here illegally. They grabbed me on the street and pushed me into the ambulance. These white-coated creatures drink my blood and eat human flesh. They cut off a piece of me every week. And then the skin is stretched and, with the help of surgical threads, the incisions are hidden again. They already ate some of my liver and stomach, you know. But for a long time, this cannot go on. Soon they will come for me. The man said with tears in his eyes. At first, Alina thought that the patient had gone crazy from post-operative shock. But when the nurse looked through his medical history, she saw that when he entered the clinic, he really weighed 125 kilograms. Carefully removing the diaper from the patient's stomach, Alina was horrified by the abundance of stitches on his body. They looked like a web spun by a devilish spider. The patient's skin color was whiter than snow, indicating the recent large blood loss. On the patient's elbows, there were traces of many injections necessary for pain relief and life support. Is he right? Traces of stitches are not at all like the consequences of an appendectomy. What is happening here? Alina thought, but did not voice her thoughts aloud. The girl suddenly became uncomfortable with what this patient had told her. Not knowing what to do next, Alina hurriedly left the ward and went to the nursing room in order to take her mobile phone and send an urgent report to Major Positive. But, as soon as she took 50 steps, the lights in the whole clinic suddenly went out. At this moment, the clouds covered the moon outside the window, which made it very dark in the corridor of the surgical department. Alina had already taken in more air into her chest in order to call the head nurse, when she heard a muffled scream, which, apparently, came from ward number 13. The girl carefully took a few steps, and then heard strange sounds that remotely resembled the hiss of a snake disturbed by someone. The sounds either grew louder or, on the contrary, became quieter. Alina froze in fear and pressed her back against the wall. At that moment, the moon came out from behind the clouds and for a few seconds illuminated the corridor of the hospital with a yellowish light. And from what Alina saw later, the hair on her head stood on end. The thing was that in the ward number 13 there were 3 strangers in overalls. 2 of them froze at the door, and the third, bent over the unfortunate patient, who just a few minutes ago complained to Alina that he was being kept here illegally. The man in the hoodie was whispering something in a language unfamiliar to the girl, and judging by his intonation, his speech did not bode well for the patient. The stranger's words sounded even faster, causing his speech to turn into a continuous hiss. Lying on the couch, the patient was either unconscious or scared to death. Then, the stranger reached out his hand with long, like a good pianist's fingers, to the stomach of a sick man. At the same moment, his companions murmured excitedly and threw off their hoods. Of course, Alina failed to see their faces in the semi-darkness of the chamber. In the moonlight, she could only see their profile. The heads of the night guests were devoid of hair and looked more like oblong gourds or melons than the heads of normal people. Continuing to hiss, they approached the patient lying on the couch and greedily pulled their hands to his stomach. At the same time, chomping sounds were heard, similar to those that a foot makes when it hits a shaky swamp. And only now Alina realized what exactly the night visitors were doing. These non-humans tore the stitches in the patient's stomach and devoured his bleeding entrails with gusto. The meal was so delicious that with delight, the creatures in robes grunted in the gut and hurriedly regurgitated swallowed, poorly chewed food. At the sight of such an abomination, Alina had an urge to vomit, which she immediately stopped by covering her mouth with her palms. The night creatures, meanwhile, continued to devour the already dead patient, scooping up fresh blood from his open peritoneum with their palms. Alina involuntarily stepped back, praying to God that the terrible guests would not know about her presence. From fear, The girl could not make a sound and, trying to cope with panic, tried to breathe not so often. The girl had to take only a few steps to the rescue staircase leading to the first floor, when suddenly a light came on in the entire building. From surprise, the girl stumbled and the Department of Surgery announced a heart-rending female cry.